Okey-doke. So, welcome everybody. I think we'll get started. I'm sure a few people more will join us as we go along. Welcome to this session on balancing the budgets. This session came about from a discussion we had in the Marketing Leader Circle, one of our coffee circles last month or the month before, I forget. And basically for the last 18 months or more now, as marketers, we've been forced to concentrate on or even divert our resources to primarily digital marketing activities to generate leads and stay in contact with our customers. And one of the clear benefits of that, I think we've all seen, is that being largely data-driven, we can see a direct correlation between what we're spending and the result that's coming in. By comparison, and especially in the broadcast and media and entertainment industries, trade shows, which have really driven a lot of our spend and our activity in the year, and even sort of dictated our cadences around product releases and everything else, have been responsible for the lion's share of our budgets, despite the fact that calculating ROI around those can be, at best, a little bit tricky. So despite the recent misses of NAB and now IBC, in-person events are back on the agenda, certainly for next year. And I'm sure I'm not the only one who's facing pressure from sales teams and other parts in the organizations to make sure that we're back at these events and trade shows doing what we always did. And I think there's, Anne-Louise, you're saying there's a definition of madness around that somewhere. And interesting on that topic, I just got a sneak peek of a new report that will be coming out next week by Bubble Agency in partnership with Coretta. That says that both buyers and sellers still rank trade shows as a number one medium for keeping in touch with industry trends, and also buyers rank it trade shows as their most trusted source for industry information, and their third most trusted source on getting specific information on suppliers. So hence balancing on the budgets. On the one hand, we've got activities that are now tried and tested over the last 18 months or more, the digital, that have quantifiable results. On the other hand, we've got pressure to go back to spending significant budgets on events that, especially in the wake of the pandemic, are kind of largely unknown entities, and even prior to the pandemic were quite hard to calculate ROI for. So I'm joined by two experts from the industry, Anne-Louise Buick, who is VP of Global Revenue at AVID, Revenue Marketing at AVID, sorry. And Jason Bradwell, who's here today as host of B2B Better, which I think is a podcast about B2B marketing, and creator of the B2B Byte blog, which is also weekly essays, I think, on B2B marketing, and very, very good thing to be following if you're not already too. So thanks very much, both of you, for joining. I'll kick off with a question really just about the last 18 months and what we have been doing. So Mike Crimp, the CEO of IBC, said in an interview back in February that we've still got the money that we hadn't spent at the trade shows, and we're working out how to spend it in other ways. Good luck to us, he said. And we've been quite innovative. So first, I just want to very briefly talk about some of how we've been innovative and stuff that we've been doing to spend that money, but also critically to drive those leads. So Anne-Louise, can I come to you first?
Sure, nice to be here. So what have we been spending the money on that would have gone into trade shows? Marketing technology. We've been improving and increasing our MarTech stack, because that, as you said, allows us to be more specific and targeted with the buyers that we're going after. We've been investing in content generation, and improving our customer journeys and our whole digital transformation and customer experience all across all of our online properties. We are not there yet. We've certainly got a way to go, but I think, the change that the pandemic initiated was the projects were already going to happen. It just accelerated them, and having the dollars redirected from trade show floors into technology, which we were desperate for, has really helped us see, communicate, and open up a lot more profitable and direct engagements into prospects and customers. So in a nutshell, that's what we did with the money. Ben, you're on mute.
Crikey. 18 months and I still can't do it. Jason, what about you?
Yeah, good to be here. Much like Anne-Louise, also been investing into our marketing technology stack. And, where before we had perhaps had a Frankenstein stack of different tools, each serving different needs for the marketing function, we have been looking at consolidating all of that into, one holistic tool, which is an opportunity which, has been great for us to redirect some of those dollars into doing that. It was something we always knew we had to do, we wanted to do, but in the flurry of organizing events on a regular basis, you sometimes push back to the bottom of the priority list. So investment in the marketing stack is one, but also using this opportunity to understand how we can better go about owning our own audience. I think when historically you've been relying a lot on third parties and partners and events to gain access to your potential buyers. Really what you're doing is you're paying to rent access to those buyers and then trying to nurture a relationship after the fact. So the fundamental question that we were asking ourselves at the beginning of the pandemic was, okay, now we've got this excess cash, what can we do to what levers can we pull in order to begin to actually own that audience, develop a direct relationship that will allow us over time to capture demand of customers that may not be ready to buy today, but be ready to buy tomorrow. So that's what we've been doing as well.
And Jason, I know you mentioned in one of your recent blogs that you were attending a show or had attended a show and were dutifully standing there greeting customers. What was your experience of going back to trade shows and being on the booth again?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. We went into it with minimal expectations. I think it's still very early in the return of live events to make a hard and fast judgment on whether or not they will return to delivering as much value as they have done historically. Based purely on that one experience I've had so far of going to a three-day conference, I have to say that I left feeling somewhat underwhelmed. The footfall based on previous years was far lower than it had ever been. The number of exhibitors on site was maybe 25% of what it had been in previous years. And you say, dutifully greeting customers coming onto the booth. I wouldn't necessarily go as far to say that we did do much of that, as many of our customers either didn't attend the show where they had done historically, or were meeting off-site. They weren't even coming into the exhibition hall and coming onto booths apart from on the odd occasion. So again, that doesn't mean that going into next year we won't be considering physical presence at these big booth exhibitions, but it does give you a moment of pause and reflection as to, should we just keep building on and doubling down on what we've been doing over the last 24 months?
So I'm going to come back to that point and what on customer behavior and perhaps and what they're thinking at the moment. But Anne-Louise, what's your experience? I mean, I know we both attended different days the very excellent DPP leaders briefing last week, which certainly had a huge buzz, but were customers there?
It's interesting because it is an excellent event. The quality of the content and discussion at DPP is always great, and they get great speakers. But I did feel there was a lot of vendors around the hall, not on stage, but definitely around the hall. It was nice to be back, to see people in the flesh. And yeah, it certainly seemed busy over the 2 days. So I enjoyed it. I'm thinking, though, that the conversations that I had about not a conference per se, but back to the trade show, everybody was of a similar mind to me. It's not going to go back to pre-pandemic levels. We have a change has been made. We now need to figure out how it's going to look going forward. And, we as the owner of the marketing budgets and the people who, in effect, help produce these events need to figure out what they're going to look like and how they're going to work for us. We did our first in-person customer event actually just in September, in that little window that we had at the end of the summer and before autumn really kicked in. And it was, I'd have to say, well attended. I think there was an appetite for people to come to it. It was very specific, it was very local, so very down route activity. But we extended the time that we would normally have an event running in order to give customers a longer period to dip in and out. We weren't trying to get everybody there within a 3-hour period. We gave them it was an 8-hour period in the end. And so whilst you didn't get the huge volume, what you got was a nice steady cadence of people coming in. And then I think there was a level of comfort with the fact that they weren't walking into a huge, room full of many people after coming out of hibernation, as it was.
And certainly what it felt like in a couple of events recently. So yeah, coming back to then customers and their behavior and what they're doing. I referenced earlier the report that Bubble and Creta Research are going to publish next week. From that, it's very clear that the buyers still rank trade shows as an important contact point in the buying cycle. At the same time, I remember very vividly one of the IABM BAM Live events earlier in the year. And don't miss to register for the one next week, by the way. But I remember at one earlier in the year, Darren Long from Sky made a remark that as a buyer, they were actually having to start think very carefully about who from the organisation would attend trade shows in the future. And how they would attend, given that, sustainability, all of us flying to one place isn't necessarily a good thing, but also we think about this a lot as a seller going to a trade show, but as a buyer, the ROI of, investing that time, that effort and the traveling expenses in going to a show. So, from your guys' point of view, what are customers are saying to you? And Anne-Louise, I'll come to you first on that one.
Yeah, well, I agree with Darren, and it also speaks to Sky have been very vocal about their climate agenda and their sustainability agenda, and they've also got to keep an eye on that, as we all do. If you look at a recent report from the Marketing Technology Alliance, surveying B2B marketeers and customers, the use of in-person events has decreased from 73% to 42%. And one of the key drivers that those surveys had said is that decision makers are preferring to do remote research and remote human interactions for a couple of reasons: ease of scheduling, less pressure, travel expenses, and ultimately we're still in the world where safety is still a consideration. So I agree with Darren, and I think it is going to ask different questions. During the pandemic, we needed to put in effect travel freezes for everyone's safety, our own people first and then all of our communities. And I don't think that anybody's going to go back to pre-pandemic level of spending on T&E. And I think coupled with what we've learned about the changes we needed to make, the pivots in order of how we do business, how we go to market, what are our routes to market, and how we engage with our customers, we've also got a number of other issues that have bubbled up to the fore because of the pandemic as well, climate and sustainability being one of the big ones. That, I don't know if you saw that BBC documentary with all the drone footage of just the world went quiet and the world had 12 months to heal. It was phenomenal, but it just showed you what impact we have with people moving around places. So I think there's a lot of factors. It's not just, travel and expense. It's a lot of corporate social responsibility elements as well.
And Jason, you mentioned that you didn't really see a lot of customers in the show, but out sitting appointments. So, did you get into the reasons of that? What were customers saying that their reasons for not being on the show floor, as it were?
Well, look, I think relative to previous events, just the number of customers that were at this particular event in total was lower than it had been historically. So whilst, they may not have been coming onto the show floor, there was actually a smaller number just more generally. And I think just kind of going back to one of Anne-Louise's points earlier on, talking about kind of these trends were already happening. These routes to a market were already there and were evolving, and almost, lots of B2B brands were at the point where they were beginning anyway to explore how else can we get in front of our customers in a more impactful and cost-effective way. And then, hey, this pandemic comes along and it forces these brands to start making these decisions and having these conversations. So I think you have to go back to what, fundamentally these big booth trade shows were started for, and it was to allow vendors like us to get in front of our customers and show them what we're flogging. I remember walking the halls of IBC 10, 15 years ago and, looking at little black, set-top boxes that you just can't see, when you're online. But a lot of this technology is now going into the cloud. It's easier than ever to have these commercial discussions at length online. And I just feel, and hearing it from my commercial team directly, that the days of B2B buyers walking a trade show floor to discover are well and truly over. They don't need to, these companies don't need to spend big bucks. And the sustainability angle is also very important as well. We should all be flying less in order to get their buyers out there discovering new solutions to their problems. They can do all of that online. Of course, you hear these people returning back to events. The thing that they say they like the most about them is having a drink and seeing each other and connecting. And that is all 100% valid and 100% a good reason why to invest in events. Do you need a big booth trade show in the middle where you're spending six figures just to have a space that people can walk past and have a sort of serendipitous discovery of who you are? I don't know. That's a big question for me.
I think there's something you just said that's really interesting to me, and it's referring it to the big booth trade show. And there's a key theme here. Those big booth trade shows were really, really useful 15 years ago when you and I were at IBC, because marketing practice, marketing technology, AI, intent tools, they weren't big for us 15 years ago. We needed the big booth trade shows in order to get to the volume of prospects and customers, because we knew 2-3 times a year where they were going to be. We didn't have the ways of contacting them that we do today on that one-to-one basis. So I think it's not that we're saying that they're not important and they don't have their place. It's disproportionate now to do six-figure investment on a 4-day real estate when you do six-figure investment on a 12-month campaign.
Exactly.
Were not at our disposal 15 years ago. And I think that's the difference as well as marketeers we've lived through.
Very well put.
So I should just point out to the audience, if you have questions that you want to ask the panel, or me, I suppose, then please do put them either in the direct chat, or I think there's a question and polls tab that you can click and ask questions, and they'll come straight through to us. So please do put your questions forward. Or indeed, if you have an answer to this next question that you would like to contribute, because my next question was, okay, so if those are all the arguments not to invest in trade shows, and it seems like there are many, what are the arguments to invest in trade shows? I think, there's I didn't mention it before, but I think there's also an important thing here that, are trade shows important to the Gen Ys and Zs and whatever's next that are coming into the industry? But how do we reach those guys in a different way? So what are the reasons to do exhibit at those trade shows? What are the reasons for that? And Jason, I'll hit you first.
I think it goes back to the point that I think myself and Anne-Louise have been making already, which is the human connection element. We all like to be in the same room as our partners and as our clients, and giving ourselves an opportunity to build those human relationships. And I think if a trade show can help facilitate that without the necessity of spending six figures on then there's absolute value in that. I also think that one thing I've been wrestling with as I've been looking at my 2022 strategy and investment in events is perhaps there is a reason to invest in booths when you are entering an adjacent market or vertical to where you currently serve, or you have you acquire a company and you want to make a big awareness blast piece about that. I think I take issue perhaps with the idea of sponsoring the same event year in, year out and showing, incremental updates and evolutions of your business, but everyone walking past already knows who you are and what it is that what need it is that you serve. So at that point, those people are not at that awareness stage necessarily. They're not trying to discover who your brand is. They need much more targeted, product focused, intent driven messaging that can just be delivered more effectively and at scale online. So I don't know if I'm answering your question, Ben. It sounds like I'm going back into why you don't need trade events. But if I just sum it up, again in 2 points: human contact and networking, where that can be facilitated by trade shows and exhibitions, and 2, where you are launching something brand new, you're entering a new market, new territory, or a new vertical, and no one knows who you are in that space, then perhaps it makes sense to invest in a booth at a trade show.
Anne-Louise, anything to add to that?
I 100% agree. It's brand awareness, and absolutely it helps when you're going into either a new vertical segment or with a new product. I agree with you, going to the same audience, to the same event year in, year out, if you don't have strong innovation and something new, then you are talking to the same pool of people. And, I sit in the revenue marketing team, so we're tasked with looking at new revenue streams, and that's not going to deliver for me. But equally, trade events do deliver at a brand level and at a reputation level and a being relevant level, and all those things help deepen relationships, help establish more trust, make sure that people still know that you're here, you're relevant, and you're there for them. And that's really important. So that is a very big reason to keep going. And as I said before, I don't believe we shouldn't go. I just believe we need to look at redefining how we go. And I also believe we shouldn't go alone. I don't think there's any business in these days that doesn't have an excellent network of partners, but also we have an excellent network of member organizations, like you mentioned, the IABM. We've got a lot of member organizations who do go to these events and represent their members. So, are we always optimizing those relationships and making sure that a lot of them run like events within the major events? Are we truly, supporting those? And so I think it comes down to objective and optimizing how we go, looking at it in different ways as well.
Great segue into my next question then. So if we go, so assume we have the presence there. So what approach should we do it to maximize our brand impact and ROI? And there's a question actually from Joshua in the audience, which is, how do we measure ROI on an event like that, which is more about brand awareness? I don't think that anyone here is going to think that counting the number of contacts badges that we scan on the booth or the amount of swag we give away is really going to cut it. So, Anne-Louise, how should we attend and how do we measure the ROI on that?
Gosh, it's a conversation we are currently having, myself and my colleague Cara, who runs corporate marketing, because we have to align on, we're determining what our KPIs are, and that is aligning around what are we hoping to achieve by going. ROI, it can be anything. It just depends what's important to you and your attendance at the time. It's not necessarily a money, a return on monetary investment. It could be just a return on resource investment. It could be a return on, are we telling the right stories and did we get enough coverage for them? Again, it's about being clear about the purpose of what your involvement is going to be. When I speak to some sales stakeholders, I get many different answers about their motivation for going to trade events. And some of them, it is absolutely just about being able to have, face time with multiple customers, and in a not so formal setting. As we know, a lot of stuff goes on in and around the show floor and, across 23 out of 24 hours for a lot of people. But there's no clear metric or formula for ROI about this, especially if you're looking at it on a thought leadership level or a brand level or a launch level. I mean, there's more clarity around key metrics if you're looking at launching or going into penetrating a new vertical. But it's depending on what your purpose is.
And Jason, I think you made a great point in one of your recent blogs about creating Instagrammable moments. And I think there is a thing there of, okay, if you're going to go to a trade show, can we actually do something with that trade show that makes builds presence elsewhere as well? So yeah, maybe you can talk to that rather than me recount your entire blog.
Yeah, no, absolutely. No, I just want to say that I agree with Anne-Louise, and I think it all has to ladder up into what is your kind of North Star metric based on, that you're using to measure the success of the marketing function as a whole. And we've both spoken about at the beginning of this session how the last 24 months has afforded us the opportunity to invest in our technology stacks. And for me, part of that has been an attribution piece of technology and model that in the future will allow us to identify, who's going to these events, who are we speaking to at these events, and then once we hopefully win the business, retroactively be able to look back at that customer journey and say, IBC that we went to back in 2022, 60% of the business we won in 2024 had attended that event, spoken to us on the booth, got a demo of the product. And that's not something that we had before. So, whilst historically it's been a little bit more difficult to measure that attribution of those events beyond just picking business cards out of a fishbowl and saying, hey, look who we spoke to, I think we're going to be able to be much more scientific where we do make those calculated bets in the future around trade show exhibition to be able to justify the ROI. But to answer your question about Instagrammable moments, we've already said that these events often are an awareness piece and making sure that the brand is front of mind. And I remember walking through my first IBC so long ago now and just being struck by how everything looked the same. Everyone was using kind of the same shades of blue on their booth. Everyone was using the same kind of language, every fan, everywhere, all the time, that kind of stuff. And it was difficult to, identify when you're looking across the room, am I going to that booth? Who am I trying to meet with next? And then I started working for a brand called Massive Interactive, and orange was our color, bold orange. And we had a nice big booth in Hall 14, and you could see it out there across the sea of blue. You couldn't miss it. And that's just one small example of standing out. I think that you can be more sophisticated and creative as marketers than just changing your color scheme. Can you find ways to host mini conferences on your booth alongside the main conference agenda and live stream those events where you're talking about hot button topics of the day to your database who couldn't attend the show? Because lots of people still won't be attending physical shows, even if they come back next year, but still could get value out of the content. Can you hire a graffiti artist to, paint one of the walls while the show's happening, so people have something they can photograph and they can post on social media? Working for a company that in sports tech, we've talked about the idea of having a penalty shootout booth on our stand that's using our technology to measure the velocity in which someone kicks the ball into the net. And it's all these kind of little creative things that as marketers we should be having a lot of fun with, that are going to stick out in people's minds, or they're going to hear about from someone, one of their colleagues on the trade show floor. Have you been to have the penalty kick out? Yeah, I'm like top of the leaderboard and I'm standing to win a new Apple Watch or something. And it's getting your brand front of mind for people. And I think that's, if you are going to have a trade show booth, one of the number one goals.
I'm going to go very slightly off topic here. And I really like the graffiti artist idea, although personally I'd have them graffitiing other people's booth. But just over the logos, you can't see it.
Yeah, over the television screens. Giving a demo, just excuse me for a second. Spray. Nothing going on.
I think one of the other things that perhaps does contribute to the ROI on a trade show, and maybe something we don't think about a lot, is the benefits around team building. I don't know if there's an element of shared trauma or something like that, but ultimately a lot of us have grown a lot closer to our colleagues by going through 5 days of IBC as it used to be, and then doing the breakdown at the end, and sitting waiting for boxes until midnight, or whatever happens or used to happen in the show. Is there a way to replicate that if we're not going to shows, or if we're reducing the number of people going to shows? I mean, that there is a certain amount of return that comes from putting all those people in one place. So how can we kind of answer that element, not just of meeting colleagues, not customers, sorry, but meeting partners and meeting colleagues in that come together environment? Jason, both of us.
Yeah, it's a very good point, and I call it being in the trenches, because it really forges, bonds of friendship when, as you say, you are working up until 2-3 a.m. the night before an IBC, just trying to get everything sorted before the show floor opens, and especially for companies like the one I work for and Anne-Louise works for, where we are global organizations. And the opportunity to actually meet colleagues from other territories is rare. There's 100% value in using these trade shows as opportunities to connect with your colleague community. That being said, do you need a trade show in the middle to achieve that? I would say probably not. It comes up to a business level. How can we find more ways to connect our global employee base? You can do that without a trade show. You can organize a summit or something in a favorable location to all the different territories, maybe once a year, where you fly everyone out, or a micro series of events of that type. I don't know, Anne-Louise, what do you think?
I absolutely agree with the point. We've been there. We that's been part of our journey. I think that's, we still have a laugh, the 6 of us that were in the back of a van when the ash cloud hit in 2010, and we couldn't get home from Vegas, and we had to drive from Milan. I mean, you just going through that, you're bonded for life at a level. But equally, if I go into our product development team, they will tell me stories of when they've stayed up for 40 hours and bonded, and we're in the trenches together because they had to get a product release out. And if I go over to professional services, and they'll tell me, oh my gosh, we had the best time when we were down route at the Olympics because XYZ happened, at the OBS, and we all had to pitch in with the customers. There are stories like ours across every function. And I don't believe we need a trade to do it, but absolutely, it has been a hub of those sorts of, bonding in the trench moments. I think that, when you asked the question earlier, Ben, and I'm not sure that either of us got to it, about Gen Zs. Do they want to do this? Do they want to go, downstream into another country for 5 days of the, booth work? I mean, it's hard work. Trade shows are hard work because you have to be on constantly, because you've got to make the most of the time that you're there and having people there. I don't know that they do. I think there's a whole level of expectation between work life. I think wellness as a key theme, and it's more than a trend. It's part of day-to-day living now, especially in that generation, that they're not prepared to give up. And I think there's a different mentality and a different culture, around the whole being on a booth for 5 days.
Great points. Please do keep the questions coming. We've got a bunch coming in, actually. So I'm probably going to go and go to some of those to go for my last question to you guys, which I think we'll try and finish up with. But this is a really good one from Nick, Jet Matrix, which is, what should small businesses do to break through the digital noise if we're not going to go to trade shows? Small booths at the shows are still valued for the small to medium-sized businesses in the industry who can't tap into communities that were created in previous years, and creating digital ecosystems for the bigger companies. AWS have reInvent, Adobe have Max, even some of the other players. Steve's here from VizRT, so there were Viz Days and things, these kind of ecosystems event, but they're not really accessible if you're one of the startups, or if you're a small to medium that can't do that due to reach and budget. So what should those small companies do to break through the digital noise? Anne-Louise, I'll come to you first.
I remember the days, right, being in a small vendor and being, I felt like a mouse on an IBC floor, and it's really hard. It's always having to think creatively about how do we stand out, how do we differentiate, how do we really make sure that this, seemingly to us huge investment, and it is a big investment, is going to determine some really good return for us. I do go back to my point about making sure that any of the member organizations that you are part of are helping you and that you're working with them, because they will help amplify and optimize any investment you've got. Make sure you're using all of their channels to getting in front of their audience, because they don't just have their own member community audience, they have a wide adjacent audience as well. And then I think it's about, going with one purpose. I think all your energy into that one purpose, and then you can have a better chance of achieving success. When you are going, wide, sort of spray and pray, you're going to really struggle to determine any good success metric out of that. So one purpose, go narrow and deep, and just go really, really focused on it. But I also am a huge believer in when you're in those environments, go hunting. Don't be shy, don't be bashful. Go up to people as they come off this platform from giving a keynote. They're never going to turn you away. We've all been there, and I think everybody does remember those days.
And Jason, do you how to cut through the digital noise? Now, I'm sure this is covered somewhere in your blog as well. So, Nick, follow Jason's blog. But Jason, any top tips to go through here?
Yeah, I think it's never been more of an exciting time for a startup or a small business when it comes to marketing, because 15, 20 years ago, there was such a huge barrier to entry for these small businesses without the huge budgets, who could invest in trade show booths. Now the playing field is leveled, right? If you can access social media, if you can build a mailing list, if you can engage online communities, you can do the same kind of things as these bigger organizations could, who are booking stands at these big booth exhibitions. Now, obviously, the side effect to that, Nick, as you mentioned, is there's now a lot of noise out there, right? And cutting through the noise has become the challenge, rather than necessarily being able to make any noise in the first place. And without knowing really, your goals or as a business, what it is you're trying to achieve through your marketing, I would say that if I was in the position of becoming a head of marketing of a brand new startup, starting from scratch, I would be investing a lot in employee advocacy and finding ways that I can engage and activate my employee base in order to reach my target customers. I think sometimes small businesses think it all needs to come from the brand, and we need to build the brand accounts and we need to build the brand presence. But especially in these early days, your executive team, your engineers, your salespeople are going to be connected, as research that says this, to 10 times as many people as your brand account is ever going to be. And that's the same as the business scales and you bring more people on, who that network, that extended network, is going to be much more receptive to hearing a message from a new business, coming from an individual, coming from a person, than they would do coming from a logo that they don't recognize. So that's probably where I'd start, just off the top of my head. But I wouldn't be disheartened if budgets are an issue which is preventing you getting access to a booth on a trade show. There are so many tools and channels that you can, if you've got something interesting to say and you know exactly who it is that you're trying to say it to, you can leverage in order to cut through. And please reach out to me. I'm more than happy to noodle on this further with you.
And I think there's a really great point there about personal networks. Just going back to the survey I mentioned earlier, in terms of trusted sources for learning about things going on in the industry, buyers reckon trade shows first, but their second most trusted source is personal networks. So yeah, totally reinforces that point there from Jason. Really very good question from Steve from VizRT, which I don't think there'll be anything more than a resounding yes from. But NAB and IBC, the two big shows in the industry, I mean, they command some seriously hefty fees for floor space, more than perhaps shows in other industries, and certainly more than any other shows in our industries. So, given the growing contribution of digital to our modern marketing activities, are we, as the marketeers, as the customers of the trade show organisations, or should we expect to see marked reductions in trade show fees? Yeah. Anne-Louise, what do you think?
As I said earlier, you know, the balance has shifted. We're not in the days we were 15 years ago. So NAB and IBC, to me, they are two tactics in larger campaigns. And I have to view them as I view all the other tactics that we deploy for our campaigns. So I think that they have to be proportionate. And happy to have, well, I referred to my colleague Cara before. She is an amazing negotiator. So she is the person that is having the conversations with IBC and NAB about their fees. But from my point of view, as the person that runs the campaigns, yeah, they are tactics. They're part of a bigger program. But they aren't the program.
No, sorry, Anne-Louise. They aren't the program, not quite. Jason.
They aren't the program. That sums it up perfectly. You know, I think I've never been tougher, I think, in my negotiations than over the last 2 months with external partners in asking for demonstrable proof of what they're going to deliver in return for our investment. Of course, it's something you always ask, and I've always asked when I've entered into a new commercial agreement, but perhaps it's been a little bit more of a leap of faith, I guess you could say, you know, just based on historic investment and commitment to these kind of activities. But certainly over the last 2 months, I've been saying to all of our partners, tell me, if I give you X, what am I getting back for Y? What can you guarantee me in return for Y? And having to be very, you know, selective, deliberate, and intentional around ultimately where we decide to place our chips based on the answers that we're getting back in return. So if IBC and NAB and other big booth trade shows like that are expecting the same level of budget allocation than they have done in previous years, I would advise to be prepared to answer those tough questions, because as Anne-Louise said, they are not the whole story anymore as they have been previously.
And I think there's a great question here, which is along similar lines, which is, are any of the existing shows showing any signs of innovation to make us want to you know, keep or increase that investment rather than, you know, balance it with the other things? Or are they waiting for us to tell them what they want? And I entered into an interesting conversation actually just yesterday on LinkedIn, where it was suggested that we should tell IBC what it is that we want as marketeers. And I said, well, very selfishly as a marketeer, why should I give up my time rather than them come up with the ideas and pitch to me? So, yeah, Anne-Louise, what's your thoughts on that?
I'd love to have that conversation. I really would, because, you know, we don't know what they know. We don't know what their pressures they're under. I think, you know, it is time to have a conversation. I think I would embrace it.
Jason?
I think, yeah, I think, you know, there are plenty of events out there based on my experience that are proactively coming to me and suggesting new and innovative ideas. And the scale of those ideas is really dependent on the business itself. Look at companies like Sports Pro, for example. They have an editorial component of their business alongside the event part of their business. So they've been a little bit more protected over the course of the pandemic because they've been able to leverage both sides of their organization in order to continue to deliver value to sponsors. The businesses that are purely events driven, have not invested in a digital ecosystem in which to deliver and serve content to their audience, certainly are struggling. And unless they can come up with proactive, high quality ideas, for me, there are plenty of other partners out there that are already doing that, that are just going to capture my, I mean, we're in the business of capturing attention. You know, they're capturing my attention, the ones that are coming to me proactively and saying, hey, here's what we can do for you to deliver value. And they usually are the smaller, leaner, born in the digital age organizations rather than the historic legacy trade shows.
I agree.
Good, very good. So last question then. We started with balancing the budgets and saying, and I think we probably all agree that the amount we should be spending on certainly the big booth shows is probably going to decrease. I guess that prior to the pandemic, most marketing organizations probably spending up to 50% or even more of their spend on trade shows. What should it be now? Jason, you first.
Yeah, it's a fun question, and not one that I think I can give a number or a percentage to. I would just say, just kind of harkening back to a couple of points Anne-Louise and I made earlier, it's just about being deliberate and intentional about the why. Why are we doing this? What is it we're trying to achieve? What is the quantifiable objective that we're going to turn to in 6 months' time, once this is all over, to say whether this has been a success or not? And that's where I would start. And if you can't get more than just we've always gone to the events, so we should do it, or a few of my customers are going to be there and I just want to have the opportunity to network with them kind of conversation, unless you can kind of elevate it to a quantifiable return, I would use that to determine how much you choose to invest in these big booth trade shows.
And Anne-Louise?
I think that was the perfect answer.
I wanted a number.
Honestly, Ben, I couldn't give you one. I really couldn't. As I said, there's so many ways that you can engage with these events, both at editorially, thought leadership, using your member organizations, using announcements. It's not all, footprint.
Very good. So I'd like to say thank you very much to you both, and thank you for all the questions that came in. There is one last question, actually. Sorry, Anne-Louise, it's specifically for you. Is scheduling a trigger word for the dog?
Oh, I think everything is dog right now. I had myself convinced she was a very well-trained dog, but she's in her adolescence now, if it's all sideways.
Excellent. Well, thank you very, very much again, both. Thank you, everyone who joined, for all the questions. I think we are going to try and turn this into some sort of blog or report afterwards, because I think it's an incredibly interesting topic that's really important to all of us. I think also we'd probably like to get the input of some trade show organisers to perhaps speak their side as well. I also mentioned, and I should thank Bubble again for giving me the sneak peek on their report, which is due out next week. So keep an eye out for that on marketing methods for the media industry. And I should also plug again the IABM BAM Live event next week, because they have been really good events this year. So don't forget to sign up for that. So thank you, everybody, and see you next time.
Thanks, Ben. Thanks, everybody.